So I have been, we're recording. I have been a publisher for probably rather longer than I like to remember. But I did an English degree, and then I did a publishing course, and then I went into publishing. And about 10, 12 years ago, I set up my own publishing consulting business. And one of the huge benefits of that, I suppose, is that I get to work with lots of different publishers. And even better, I get to work on the rather wonderful Writers and Artists Yearbook, which you may or may not be familiar with, the big, very big red book, often called the Bible, telling you all you could possibly want to know and more about the publishing industry. And the reason and indeed how to be a published author. And published, as I will go on to talk about in the talk today, means in various different ways. So that might be a self-published author. It might be published through a traditional publishing outlet. It might be having a literary agent or not having a literary agent. It might be working through some kind of crowdfunding operation, such as Unbound. It might be publishing digitally only or in print and digital. So all the various variations in that. And the reason we publish the Writers and Artists Yearbook every single year, and also the sister edition, slightly smaller and slightly younger. I think we're now in the 19th edition, whereas for the big one, we were first published in 1906 and have been published every single year, bar 1 year during the war when there was a paper shortage. The reason it's published every year is because things change. As you probably know, it's quite a fluid industry. People come and go. Publishers arrive and then die. Others become eaten up by the big conglomerates, and others set up on their own. Agents, the names of agents and who they're representing and what they're doing, and if they have open submissions, changes from year to year. So really, it does two things. It tells you about what's going on in the industry and gives you lots and lots of advice from people inside that industry, and most importantly, I think, from authors and illustrators who once upon a time, even though we don't think that they were once unpublished. And it gives their advice about how they've become the best-selling authors that they have. And it also gives lots and lots of up-to-date information about who to contact in the industry, how you should put proposals together, all of those sorts of things. So it both reflects the industry and also provides lots and lots of information to get inside the industry, if you like. And so it's a real privilege for me to have people bothering to come and listen to me. Last time, I think I had 50. I think it was capped at 50. So this is really good, 129. So I'm obviously not doing too badly in some of the advice I'm doling out. But it's lovely to see you all. It's pretty wet and grungy where I am, so that's another excuse not to go out and prolong the festivities from the weekend. So what I intend to do is give quite an overview of some of the options available to you. And that's whether you might be publishing or writing for adults or for children or for young adults, YA, whether you might be an illustrator, whether you want to do print or digital, whether you want to do self-publishing or traditional publishing. And what I'm trying to do is to give you a sense of the ways in which you might help yourself. So it's not categorical, you must do this. It's advice and ways that you might take some of this and think about it further, about what you think you need for your writing, what you think you need to get your writing in front of your readership, because basically that's what publishing is. It's making something available to a wider community. And that might be you want to make money out of it. It might be that you want to share a memoir. You might want to share ideas. You might be working with a charity. You know, there's multifarious ways why we want to become published and get our work out there. So I'm hoping that I'll give enough of an overview that you can then come back and ask lots of questions to extend the discussion further. And I think that's also the other thing. It's really nice to be able to not only ask questions, but for other people to chip in with some of their thoughts when we get to the Q&A session. So assuming that's why you're all here, and you're at the right presentation, I will share my screen and we will go straight to the slides. Can everybody give me a handshake or a thumbs up if you can't see it? If you can see it, that's fine. Perfect. Okay, so how to get published. So I'm the editor, as I said, of these two tomes, which we publish every year. And I'm also an author for a sister volume called Guide to Getting Published. And really, the yearbook is a lot of facts and information and some shorter articles, so 80 or so articles from various authors and other people inside the publishing industry, including literary agents and salespeople. But this book, The Guide to Getting Published, is a chapter-based, and it goes into much greater depth about all the different stages, from writing to what you do with your text, how it's edited, what a publisher might do with your work when it gets delivered, what an agent might do for you and how you might be represented, what kind of contracts you might need to sign, and what you do all the way up through the publishing process, through production, how you work with a publicist maybe, sales and marketing. And crucially, and the most important thing, apart from writing something, is right at the other end of the spectrum. How on earth do you get what you've written into the grubby little hands of your readership? And that might be a virtual readership, or it might be a reader who's going into your local bookshop or to your local library. And really, it's kind of understanding that part of the equation is how do you get to the reader, which is really the most important thing for a writer beyond having written something, and also by far the most difficult. You're probably aware that we have fewer bookshops than we used to have, and they can't possibly stock every book that is written or published in the UK, let alone overseas, every single year. But we have this wonderful thing, of course, now called the internet, and the dreaded Amazon, which is actually an author's best friend in lots of ways of getting through to the reader. So some of the things we, and also Writers and Artists have a website. It's actually been revamped since this screen, and that is additional to the books. It provides real life information, if you like. If the book is about digesting and having a thoughtful response to what's happened in the past year and what's going to be happening in the coming year across the media and publishing industries, then the website is able to respond in sort of more real time has lots of blogs and articles, lots of further advice, free advice. You just need to register on the site, and then you get access to that advice, and you can sign up to our competitions and events such as this and other events that we run. So I am going to look at the different ways into publication and the implications of each of those, putting together the perfect manuscript, if there is such a thing, the best manuscript you can possibly make it before you either hand it over to an agent, before you hand it over to a publisher, or crucially, before you self-publish it for your own readership. What does that look like, and what do I mean by that? Look a bit at hooking an agent, some of the things about putting an agent submission together and why they want it in that way. And we can talk a little bit about what you need to do there. There'll be different criteria for different kinds of book. So non-fiction, fiction. If you're writing non-fiction, then perhaps you can ask some questions in the session. And also for children's, we often have questions about what do you do if you're writing a picture book? Do you have to send illustrations in as well? Quick answer, no, but we can talk about that later. And then I suppose this one, the improving your chance of success, what it is you can do on the back of the advice I'm giving to improve your own chances. What shouldn't you do, and what should you do in that area? And then the Q&A. With everybody together. So as you probably know, there are two, and what I can't do very easily with so many of you there is actually ask, if I was in a room with you, and that may happen one day, I'd be asking who you were writing for, what your market was, what your genre was, what your age group was, and I'd also be asking who's already published, who's already had a self-publishing route, and who's conventional. So I'm going to assume that those of you in the room across all the spectrums, those who've never been published, those who are writing and not yet finished that creative stage, those who have been published, and some who are doing their own self-publishing, may even be in the midst of it. So forgive me if some of what I'm saying is not pertinent to you, but it's about the whole ecosystem I'm just going to describe here. So for sake of argument, conventional, traditional, whatever we like to call it, up until about 15 or so years ago, 20 years ago, the route really for writers such as yourselves was to secure some kind of deal, either direct with a publisher. For fiction, that's unlikely, but for more specialists, so for example, education publishing, if you are a teacher and you've written a book, you probably would go direct to the education publisher. If you've written quite specialist non-fiction, so for example, you're an expert in model railways, and there might only be 1 or 2 publishers across the UK who publish in that area, you probably go to them direct. If you're writing fiction, if you're writing children, YA, if you're doing children's non-fiction, illustrated non-fiction, you probably would need an agent. And when we say agent here, we're meaning, of course, a literary agent or in a creative illustration agent. So you would normally, to get to the publisher, have to go via the agent. So it's quite, you can see there's already a bit of a route going on here. Whereas with my lines, you can see at self-publishing, there's no intermediary between you and the type of publishing that you are doing, the format in which you are publishing. Which include online, as I said here, audio, ebook, print, app, all of the above, and or none. So, and it's up to you as an author, if you're self-publishing, which of those you would like to get into. Now, I suppose the best bit of advice is try a bit of all of them. So particularly audio, ebook and print, because you're not likely to cannibalize your own readership, you're likely to add to your readership. And most publishers these days are publishing in all those formats, so print, ebook, audio, simultaneously publication from the outset. You probably might have read some of the things in the media during lockdown, so which is the one industry or one of the industries which actually did fantastically well during lockdown? Publishing, for very obvious reasons, really. People were able to access content digitally, have it sent to their house, could download to their Kindle. Audio went through the roof. So it had a lull about 10, 15 years ago and has had a massive resurgence where publishers are bringing their audio operation back in-house. It went up by 40% across the board, audio sales. So absolutely fantastic. Great news for publishers. And so we're not just thinking about print, but actually print did really, really well in lockdown. The only area which didn't thrive was educational and academic, but all the others did incredibly well in print as well. And I think the other thing, 2 other major things, books are cheap. They're really cheap in comparison with other things. They give us great solace, particularly stories. One of the things we might want to curl up with in the time of lockdown, we might want a bit of fantasy or romantic fiction to take us away from the horrors of the reality. So these are your options. What conventional means other people doing it for you. So people who've been in the industry who know what they're doing. Self-publishing can mean 2 different things, really. It means do it all yourself. Which is probably unlikely unless you're a very skilled individual and have a lot of time and a lot of patience to be a designer, book designer, a text designer, to be brilliant at editing as well as writing, to be a great illustrator if you're doing illustrations for a book, to be a great marketeer. You might and you can, and there's some great sites out there who will support you in showing you all the various operations. And we also have our own self-publishing guide to all those different stages. So if you did want to do them yourselves, how you would do that. Possibly the more likely is the route that you might be getting some support from other operators. Now you might get them from one individual like Troubadour, who provide all of those editing, design, marketing, printing, whatever, putting together an ebook operations for you. And it's kind of a one-stop shop, a self-publishing provider service. Or you might just choose individuals or organizations to help you. So for example, you might just sign up for the likes of something like readsy.com, which is a massive catalogue of individuals who are offering services to self-published writers. And you might find an editor there that you might do your own transaction with to edit your book, or you might find a designer to produce a cover design, or you might be lucky enough to know people, or even in your own circles to maybe share in some kind of cooperative. You do some editing for somebody and they do a text design for you or what have you. So the self-publishing, DIY can mean various things. It can mean you literally do it all yourself, but it's more likely to mean that you do some of it yourself and you buy in some of those other services to help you produce the book under your own imprimatur, which is what is different from the conventional. Now, the good news is that in self-publishing sphere, a lot of the people working as individual editors or copy editors or designers or marketeers are people who've worked in the industry. So they know what they're doing. The downside is, how do you know that they are reputable and they say who they say they are? Lack of regulation is something that comes up a lot about self-publishing. And in the olden days, not so very long ago, we would use the word vanity publishing, and they are still vanity publishers. So self and vanity, effectively, they're both about ego and about doing it yourself, but actually vanity, where self is considered a reputable terminology, if you like, vanity publishing is what we use to describe the scammers. And that's really, in shorthand, those who are asking two things: for you to part with quite a lot of money to produce something for you, which they may not produce very well, may not give you a very clear contract, but crucially may ask for your rights. So you hand over not only your money, but they do, by handing over your rights for the exploitation of your content, so the copyright, if you like, they will exploit that and do with it what they want, and you've no longer protected by holding on to that. I'm happy to talk a little bit more about that later if you want to. There's a good report that was launched by the Society of Authors, jointly Society of Authors and the Writers Guild of Great Britain, a week and a half or two ago, and I can send you links to it if you like. It's called It's a Steal, and it has done some research into the industry, particularly around self-publishing, vanity publishing, and things to be aware of, some of the named individuals or organisations in that to avoid. And of course, crowdfunding. Unbound is probably the most well-known editorially led crowdfunding site for publishing. So crowdfunding, for those of you who don't know, in terms of the publishing side of things, means that you go through Unbound. They have an editorial team who assess the proposal that they receive, and that those that go ahead, they put them up on their site, and the individual authors bid for readers. So it's a bit like it's what happened with the likes of Dickens and various other people in the past, where you only produce something because you know there's a readership for you. It's what we do in other industries, and but we supply and demand, but don't really do it in publishing. In publishing, we provide it and hope that somebody will want to read it, and we sell all our copies. So crowdfunding is interesting because it means you only produce something, or Unbound only produce it if there's a definite readership for you. For the title, so they have kind of levels of money that they're bidding to, and then you can, if you're one of the sponsors, so one of the potential readers, if you give them quite a lot of money, you get free copies of the books with your name in it, or there may be other, or a party, or all those kind of incentives behind it. So why would you self-publish? I suppose some of the things I've written there is you hold on to your rights, you have the power, you decide what you want to do. You may have been turned back from a traditional publisher or agent and getting annoyed. You may think you've got direct access to your market. Say you're working in particular organisations or for a charity, you may have a direct mailing to those individuals so you can get to them direct. I think whatever you do, and these are some of the things I'm going to talk about, is about quality. So make it the best it can possibly be. Make it as professional as it is. It would be great not to be able to tell the difference between a self-published and a conventionally published book. In many cases, it isn't possible to, other than looking on the imprint page or on the spine and seeing it's their colophon or a logo I'm not familiar with. But all too often, I think people let themselves down. They've written an amazing, interesting book, and then the production values or the design values aren't good enough, and they do look very self-published. So again, just something to be aware of. I won't go through this. You can have the slides afterwards if anybody's interested. It's just thinking about some of the areas where you can look at in terms of self-publishing. Again, be aware of vanity publishers, but there's just lots and lots of areas where you can now publish your writing. Wattpad, if you're familiar with that, is great. That's kind of, it's not a marketplace, it's the opposite. It's a communication tool where authors and writers share their writing. So the one thing lots of people tell me, and particularly there's been an issue in lockdown, of course, is that they don't have other people to talk to about their writing. So belonging to reader groups and writer groups and meeting other people through the likes of Wattpad and sharing ideas and thoughts, and just being buoyed up by other people who are doing the same sort of things as you is great. The other great thing about lockdown, which is why I'm not surprised there's more people coming to this session, is lots and lots of people had time to write and felt impelled to write and compelled to write. So I think anecdotally across publishing, literary agents are finding they're having lots and lots more submissions from people who really sort of finally got down and said, I've got time to do it, I've been meaning to write, and lockdown has given me the excuse of isolation to actually do it. So just to kind of recap on the why self-publish, I think sometimes you can get to market more speedily. Publishers are notoriously slow in what they do, and one of the reasons for that is the market. So there's what we call established lead times for getting a book into reps, and the reps are then taking it to the traditional bookstores. So for the likes of Waterstones, it's usually a 12-month lead. Now, of course, that is circumvented by digital, so Amazon and the like, it's not such a long lead time. But yeah, why self-publish? Because it's often quicker. Control and ownership, I've spoken a little bit about that. You decide what you want to do, how you want to do it. No publisher is going to tell you either through their contract or through their expertise that they should do it differently. You get the cover you want, you get the title you want, etc. I suppose the only caveat to that is publishers tend to know what they're doing, and that's because they have market nous and intelligence, that they've been working in the market for a long time. So often it's not a good idea to think the publisher is wrong, but you might not agree with them, and you might not want them to do with your work what you think you want to do with it. So for example, I had somebody I met at an event had written a book, a really interesting book set during the war in Singapore, and it shuttled between Singapore and Shanghai. And it was quite a cerebral novel, actually. I thought it was very literary, but the publisher chose to put quite a, I suppose for want of a better term, a sort of chick lit type of cover, definitely appealing to female authors. And she was really a sort of romantic female, nothing wrong with that, but that's not the type of book she thought she'd written. But actually, she then conceded later on that the publisher was writing that because it brought her, she got good reviews, and so people who were wanting to buy literary still read about it, but actually brought her a bigger following of readership through the way that they were placing it in that segment of the market. Cheap and free, I'll earn lots of money because I keep it all myself, won't I? Typically Amazon, if you self-publish on their KDP site, you will retain 70% of the royalties. Yes, you might, but 70% of £1.50 is not the same as going through a publisher who might be retailing something at £10.99 or for a hardback £20.99. So the economics, if economics matter, making money out of your books matter, then it's good to look at those. So you might need to sell more books if you self-publish. Now, some people do. So what we call hybrid authors, who might retain their digital rights, so they'll let a publisher publish a print edition. So I think that was E.L. James, I think, did that. She was first of all fan fiction, then she published electronically, and then she gave the rights to a print publisher who were able to get that book into bookstores. It's really difficult as a self-published author to get your books into bookstores. So and she obviously earned tons and tons of money. So the books, the stories you read in the press will be the outliers. So, of course, they're going to be the people who do make lots of money from self-publishing. But no surprise, and this isn't a secret, most authors don't make much money, either self-published or traditionally published. It shouldn't be like that, but it is like that. It's hard to sell lots and lots of copies of books. Doesn't mean you can't. And as I say, some hybrid publishers, authors are doing incredibly well by selling their own electronic books, and they're doing that through their own websites, through their social media, really determined interaction with their readership and having a real dialogue with their readers, giving them free copies, sample copies, really engaging with them, which often publishers themselves don't have time to do. Yeah, it could be free if you do it all yourself, although your time isn't free, I'm assuming, as in you could be doing other things with that time. But yes, it takes quite a lot of effort and different stages to publish a book. And people are always surprised by how manual it is. I mean, not literally manual, but how different many stages you are doing in terms of writing it and then editing it and designing the insides and the outsides, and thinking about what keywords you're going to use for it on Amazon. And what about the blurb? Oh, goodness, I forgot to do the blurb, but how should that be written? And how professional is it? What kind of key, there's lots of things that have to happen. And then they all come together, eventually produce some wonderful finished book. Flexible, yes. Is pretty obvious in terms of you do what you want to do when you want to do it. Direct access to market and readership, I think, is the most crucial. As I've said before, if you have that already set up, or you can do that through mailing lists or setting up your own mailing list, then that's a brilliant, or your social media is a brilliant way to self-publish. And notable successes, yes, I've mentioned that. So it is the future. I think now it's not a dirty word. It would be, people were very sniffy. Agents were very sniffy in the past about self-published authors, so they didn't want to then take people on. But to be honest, they're looking for the best writers and they're looking to make money. So if somebody as a self-published author does exceptionally well, I can guarantee an agent will be knocking on your door. In fact, several will be knocking on your door so that they can have a slice of the pie too. So what about publishers? So I come from a publishing background, as I said, and I've worked with inside the industry, but I've also worked with self-published authors to help them get their works into print. So I get to see it from both sides, which I think is important if I'm giving any form of independent advice. So publishers know what they're doing, they have a track record, they've been doing it for years. The kudos, if you want to publish a poetry book, you probably want to have it published with Chatto and Windus or with Faber and Faber, because you want to be part of the T.S. Eliot history, etc., etc. So that's another reason why. Penguin, who wouldn't want to be published with Penguin? But there's lots and lots of smaller presses who know what they're doing too, of course, and they're all listed in the Writers and Artists Yearbook. Quality, design, editorial production, all of those, you don't have to pay for those if the publisher is doing them for you. In fact, you should never part with money if you're working with a publisher or with a literary agent. They should be making money for you. They should put all the risk, they should bear the risk financially, and then collectively you and the publisher and the agent sharing any monies that are made from the sale of your book, and that is usually through royalties. And royalties are a percentage of the income that is made from the book. And that is, if you have an agent, that will be shared with your agent. Typically, they take 10 to 15% of your monies. So an agent, you never pay an agent either. It's not a fee-based relationship. They are representing you, and they take you on the assumption that you're going to be this amazing, wonderful, best-selling author with 59 books in your back catalogue, and then they are going to sell the hell out of them to an agent, to a publisher, and then the publisher will do remarkably well with them too. And that all of you, those triumvirate, all share in the winnings, if you like. Sales and marketing expertise, yes. How do you get to market? Crucially, you need to be able to do that, and to get into a bookstore, you will need sales and marketing expertise, although it's much easier now. You can do that through the Apple Store, through Amazon, through lots of other intermediaries who will help you. Through Ingram Spark, if people are familiar with them, they really well, and you can get your book if you sign up with them. In catalogues, library cataloguing across the globe, and getting to a market very easily that way. Publicity and media, you might want to do that yourself, but a publisher knows, again, has got the contacts. How do you get your book reviewed in the national press or the local press, or via book bloggers online? They will have those contacts and will be fostering those over time and be able to get a slot possibly for your writing. Basically, they do it all, and that's the complete opposite of self-publishing. Clue is in the name. So I suppose really, what would I recommend? Well, it's typically woolly answer, which is it depends what you want. And I think these are really crucial things to ask yourself. When you're thinking about how you're going to get your book for your market, for your readership, in your genre, in your format, you have to think about all of those things. And by format, remember, I'm talking about print, ebook, digital, or audio. What is it you want? What are you trying to achieve? Do you want to be published because you want to make lots of money? Do you want to be published because it's your new second career and you are going to spend all your time doing it day in, day out, 9 to 5? Do you want to publish because you've got something you really think needs being said? Do you want to publish because you have a story that you think other people haven't read about in the past, and you're also now getting frustrated because agents and publishers are always turning you down? So I think you need to think about what you're trying to achieve, and then put how you do that in the context of that. So what you want, personal preference, longer term ambitions, do you have a whole series of books for children, say on football or something? Or do you have some pamphlets which you think could make nice little books on gardening that you think could go to a particular community? Do you want to try and work with a particular organisation, RHS or whoever it might be, working on those? What is it you're trying to do? Who your market is. So there are certain genres that tend to work better electronically. And by better, I mean that there's a market for it. So typically those have been romance, fantasy. So by that, I mean things that you might download to your Kindle or other devices. Not so much children's, again, for obvious reasons, that the parents tend to be buying for the children and they might want them to have a physical book, particularly younger children. So yeah, YA is good electronically. And the other one is erotica, so stuff that might not have been stocked in a bookstore. And then there's all those things like fan fiction and other forms of fiction, where, for obvious reasons, digital has got no length restrictions. You can be as outrageous as you like within the law. And the sites for be sharing that work. So what's your market and who do you think? So literary fiction, yes, of course, books are sold as ebook, but we're still selling a lot of those. Those are the ones that tend, and popular non-fiction, or again, romance is actually in both print and digitally. If you look at the Times top selling books, you see it's quite a broad variety, but a lot of detective fiction also does really well electronically. It's basically the stuff where there's a big market, and a market you can get to works particularly well digitally. Think about that and who you're writing for. And then I suppose also how much time do you have to devote to this? If you want to really find out about how publishing works, and how to get your hands really dirty. And that's the thing I love about publishing. I run a publishing consultancy company, so I love at one end of the spectrum giving lots of advice. Who doesn't love giving advice? I'm doing it now, and have people listen to me, so it's strategic level. But the other thing I absolutely love, with the Writers Artists Yearbook, I still decide what goes on a page. I still work with the production and printer house. I still think about what the blurb's going to be. I love those two ends of it. So it really is being creative in a kind of very practical, as well as a kind of strategic way, if you like. So it's how much time do you have to do any of that yourself, all of that yourself, write a marketing plan, really think about it, talk to other people, follow blogs by people who've already self-published, or do you want that responsibility, and it's a lot of responsibility, and that burden sometimes be taken on by a publisher, and do you want to make money? That's the kind of killer question. So when I was talking about your bestest manuscript, the best it could possibly be, I suppose what I mean is how it's going to be if you're going to submit it to an agent or direct to a publisher, or if you're going to publish it yourself online. You could go off after this talk, have a Word document, and you could upload it to Amazon, and you could have a book up there and a narrative for people to read. Would they buy it? Probably not, if it's not easy to find, so that you need keywords and metadata to discover it. But also if the quality isn't good, and by the quality I mean, is it properly put together? So does it look nice as a package? And does it read well? So the kind of reading well side of things, is it grammatically correct? Are there any typos or spelling errors? Does it all make sense? Is everything there? So what the whole point of editing really is, or self-editing, but editing by professionals, is so you don't know they've been there. It's tidying up and burnishing behind the scenes. So you don't realize editor's been in place, but you only notice it if an editor hasn't. So if spelling errors have been left in, it hasn't been properly edited. If time sequences don't work in a novel, that it hasn't been properly edited. If the eyes of one of the characters in your novel, or something else, their hair, for example, hairstyle, or something else, or the clothing changes from scene to scene when it should be continuous, that's obviously problematic. And the reason for editing is two things: ease of readability. So I don't get distracted by error and things that get in the way of me making sense of a piece of writing or a novel and my enjoyment of it. But also, I think to make sure that, the reading experience is a really positive. I just went off my head what the other thing I was about to say, but it will come back to me. Yeah, so it's about having, and also being highly professional. So doing something really well so that your readership will come back and read your next installment of your novel or your trilogy or whatever you're doing, your series. So when you're talking about, that's a manuscript that you might be preparing for self-publishing, but if the editing quality of it really matters. But if you're preparing, let's say for an agent, and it might be a publisher, let's say for an agent, these are some of the things you also need to think about. You prepare it in a way that they want you to prepare it. So don't do it how you want to do it. Look on agent sites, look in Writers Artists Yearbook, look on publisher sites. How do they want you to produce your manuscript to deliver to them? And by that, I mean, do they want it in a single file? Do they want it separate chapters? Unlikely. Do they want 3 chapters, 1 chapter? Do they want it as a PDF? Some of them do. Do they want it as a Word document? Some of them do. Do they want you to submit it through a central portal on their website? Some of them do. Do they want it as an email attachment? Some of them do. What I'm saying is there is no rule. The rule is you need to check what they want. So what you need to provide for them is clarity, really. You need to provide the content, which is highly readable and it's professional. You need to number the pages, because if they drop it, if they decide to print it off, that might be a bit of a disaster. It also shows that you've got a logic and in control of your content, and it also helps you if for example, you put a chapter in the wrong order as a double check. Single file, usually they probably wouldn't want lots of different chapter files. Contact details, absolutely crucial. On the front, in the header and the footer, who you are, how to contact you, telephone number, email. It's kind of apocryphal but possibly true story about William Boyd going to the London Book Fair and going up to a sort of doyen of the publishing industry, a literary agent, with his short story manuscript, and leaving it with her, turning tail and forgetting to have left any of his details on it. So had to go back again, realised he hadn't put his telephone number, who he was, just think about the history that might have happened if he'd never done that. Gone back. I don't really know how true that is. I think a lot of very famous authors like to think that they found it really difficult. Some obviously did, and there's a bit of a competition, I think, with famous authors about how many times they were rejected before they were catapulted into bestseller stardom. But I'm sure that some did actually get a deal straight away. So yeah, who you are so they can contact you, which is what you're hoping they will do. So getting an agent, what are the main things to think about? Yeah, do your homework, take time, don't rush. You spent all this amazing time working on your script, even perhaps having some outside editing help, looking at it yourself, revising, re-revising, and then don't just waste time by just chucking it out there. Sit on it for a bit, look at it again, reread it. Find out which agents would be suitable for you and your genre. Don't waste your time sending a submission to a children's agent if they don't represent adult horror, for example. Very few agents, it's getting better, represent sci-fi, which is quite frustrating, but you can go direct to some of the publishers for that genre, but it's also why a lot of authors self-publish through digital for sci-fi. Know a little bit about who you're writing for and the nature of the current market. So it's good if you're writing for children 8 to 10, say, it's good to know what current children aged 8 to 10 are reading. So have a look in your local library, go and look online, talk to teachers, have a sense of what kind of books are in. So don't follow the trend, although I think that is tempting, because by the time you've submitted, that trend will probably be over and done with. So if it's mermaids masquerading as police detectives or whatever it might be, that's a random thing, but if that's in today, it probably won't be in 2 years' time when your book's being published by a publisher. So write what you want to write, try not to follow trends too much, unless you are deliberately doing Me Too publishing and getting out there really quickly, and that kids love cartoon books, and you've got a really good idea about you're mixing Gangster Granny from David Walliams with Liz Pishan, who does all these wonderful Tom Gates books, and you're kind of fusing the two, and you've got this great kind of, because kids love that sort of stuff, or you've got a fantastic Angels series for little kids, or that detective fiction sells really, really well, and you like the idea of writing a new cozy crime series because there seems to be an insatiable appetite for that. So that's absolutely fine. And so one of the things when you're looking to approach an agent, you're finding the most appropriate agent for you and your book, and that might be several. So you might have to contact 15 or whatever. I would suggest 5 to 10 in the first instance. Keeping a spreadsheet, so keeping track of who you've contacted and what their response has been, and don't be frightened of chivvying them up after a few months if you haven't heard from them, or even a few weeks, but try not to be too grumpy in your chasing. Try to be as politic and as polite as possible. What's the point of your book? Why would they want to publish it? Think about why an agent is looking at what they're looking at. So you need to give them some idea of why they should look at what you're sending into them. Is there an anniversary? Is there a particular thing that you're aware of? Is there a particular skill you have? Did you used to work in a police department and that's why you know a lot about police procedural novels? Are you a teacher and you're writing a series of books for children because you happen to teach that age range? All of that kind of thing. So what makes you the right person to write this book? If that's there, if it isn't, that's fine. But don't try to be too clever. They're busy people, spending most of their time looking after their existing authors. So you need to be able to catch their eye quickly so that they want to look at your submission. And your submission should be a cover letter or email these days. Again, look at their instructions about what they want you to do. And it should be short and crisp and to the point. Typically, invent a title even if you haven't got one yet, because it makes it look more real. It makes you feel more real about it, and it's going to happen. What it is, who it's for, a quick mini blurb, if you like, what we might call the elevator pitch of 50 to 100 words. It's a drama based in Liverpool, about a coming of age drama based in Liverpool, set in the past, blah, 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 whatever it happens to be. Synopsis, typically, not all of them ask for it, and these are usually the worst thing for writers to compose. If it's a novel, it's basically saying, this is what happens at the beginning, this is what happens in the middle, and this is what happens at the end, and this is what the trajectory for my character. If it's non-fiction, it will be the series, the outline, a much fuller outline of the content for the book, and what's going to happen in each chapter. And then sample chapters, so the actual content. Usually, typically, for a usual 80,000 word book, it might be 3 chapters. People often ask, which 3 chapters? Do I send my favorite 3? No, you send the first 3. It has to be chronological, because that's what an author will come to. They'll open the first page of the book. That's what the agent will do. That you want to hook the agent, as a publisher will eventually want to hook the reader with those first lines, with those first paragraphs, with those first pages. What you are trying to achieve with your cover letter is that they'll pick up the sample chapters and read those, and then they'll be so excited they'll phone you or email and ask for the full script. That is what you're hoping to do. That is your bid with your hooking the agent. So the key is not to fluff it. So to be as professional, to be accurate, to address them appropriately, not dear sir. Most agents are women. They get really annoyed about that. Find their name. Don't send a letter, the same letter to every single agent. Make it particular, make it individual to you, your book, and to that particular agent. Make it look like you really have taken your time to do this properly. And I really do suggest that you have some kind of tracking mechanism so you can see who you've written to, because if you've got lots of emails buzzing around, you might forget who you've sent to. How can you improve your chances of finding an agent, finding an author, finding a readership? The crucial one, and if you read the Writers Artists Yearbook, the one that all the authors say, and particularly in their foreword every year, read, and read widely, not just within the genre or the age range, although that's particularly necessary, in which you are writing. But read, find out what your readers are reading. And I'm sure that all of you are voracious readers. Do your research. The libraries still on good, bookshops, magazines, festivals, online. Come to events like this, find out what's going on, ask lots and lots of questions, ask fellow authors, join a writers group. That is both for critiquing, and lots of local libraries have really good ones. And I know u3a has burgeoning numbers. And as I've said at the beginning, I really urge you to submit for the short story competition, which I have third year coming up. I have the privilege of being one of the assessors or judges of that. And it's always a joy to read the kind of huge range of writing that we get to that competition. Just do it. What's the best way of being a good writer is to write. And it sounds a bit of a cliche, but it's true. Just practice, do lots of it, enter competitions, write for different genres, try things out, have a go, do a bit every day, set yourself challenges. In November, do the NOMO, where you do so many words per day and submit online. Yeah, just do it and have fun doing it. And find it difficult, yes, but overcome those difficulties. If you find you're writing a novel and you're stuck in the midst of it and you don't know what's happening there, go off and write a bit of non-fiction. Go and write the backstory to one of your characters that won't actually appear in the book, but to get to really enjoy their company and what they're like. What are their favorite colors? What kind of dog do they have? What do they wear? Something which kind of gets you excited about that character again and what their motivations might be. So keep a notebook, write online, do however you do, but I always carry a notebook around with me. And I still on the train, on a plane, sitting on a bus queue. It's great just to kind of jot down ideas as they come to you. Promote yourself if you want to. I'm very ambivalent about social media, and I'm a bit of a hypocrite because I am lucky enough to have colleagues at Writers and Artists who do all the social media. And you are speaking to the person who did an online Twitter chat, but didn't. I had somebody sitting next to her typing in all my replies, and that's how hopeless I am. I like social media, and I think social media is fantastic. If you have a passion for it and are good at it, by all means contact your market that way. All I would say is don't try and do everything. Have a go at one thing. This is particularly in the run-up to actually publishing a book, and often publishers like it if authors have some kind of social media presence, but you do not have to. But it can help as long as if it's appropriate, social media to reflect what you're writing about. Be patient and ambitious. Okay, so that's a nice dual thing, and it's difficult. And I think the other thing, authors, we're expecting them to be sensitive, creative beings and also have the hide of a pachyderm, because every time you're getting rejected by an agent or a publisher, it stings. But try not to take it too personally, which I know is a crazy thing to say, really, but it's not you they're judging. And it's not even necessarily the quality of your text. It might be that isn't the book for them at that moment. they're probably typically an agent might take on 2 or 3 new authors a year. That's really not very many, especially when they're getting 100 submissions a week. So what you're trying to do with both improving your chances for getting your script under the nose of an agent is to make them not reject you. That's what you're aiming to do, so that at least you get through the first hurdle. And be ambitious. I think that is important. It's not saying, oh, it's not for me, this game. As I said before, we all know the stories of J.K. Rowling and everybody else of her ilk, who once upon a time were sitting in coffee houses and were not published authors. Why shouldn't it be you? And I think it's still one of the wonderful parts of the world, really, in society, where it doesn't really matter what you look like. I know it does in certain spheres, and we know about celebrity writers and things, but actually it doesn't really. It's about the quality of what you put down on the page. And I think that really is fantastic, that still really matters. It's about words that work in that kind of, as a piece of alchemy. You put them together and it just works. You have a story that people actually want to read and even pay for. I mean, what's not more wonderful than that? And really, just to finish off, for those of you like me who are not in the youngest in society, I think it's good to be reminded that it's not the youngest who also always are highly successful. And these are just 4 individuals who you're probably familiar with, who didn't start publishing into, shall we call them, the later years. Paul Torday, if you're interested in his memory, is the Paul Torday competition, which is for people writing books over the age of 60, I think it is. So that's a really good one to look out for. There are increasingly some other competitions, particularly aimed at people. And if you want to know more about that, I'm more than happy to send some information around about that. Mary Wesley, of course, was in her 70s when she published her first book and carried on writing. So there's lots of good examples of people who have done it, and in later years. Diana Athol, who was the very famous editor, notably of Jean Rhys and Wide Sargasso Sea, so she produced her first memoir, Stet, I think in her 80s, when she was in her 80s. She died at 100, or was it 101, or just shy of her 100th birthday, maybe. And she was writing well up to the end, and was never lost for words. And I think she wrote a really good article for the Writers Artists Yearbook, because I was particularly interested in hearing from somebody who'd had a whole publishing life, so both as editor and writer, and spanning a whole century. And I think some of the things she said, well, read was one of them, but also, never be afraid to look back on your memories and have, just think, those of us who are older, just think of all the things we've lived through. Just think of all the experiences we can share. Just think of all the stories we ourselves have imbibed that we can provide for younger people, telling them about history, telling them about lives lived. And I think that's really important to remember. That it's one of the things on the podcast I did recently with the u3a, and they were asking me, why, can older people, put it like that, still get publishing deals? Absolutely, they can. If you're writing content that people want to read, it doesn't preclude you in any way whatsoever. And that is me. I have managed to talk for a good 50 minutes. Apologies for that. But I'm open for all the questions. I think Georgia is very kindly going to navigate her way through the chat. And then I guess it's going to be a show of hands for who wants to ask a question.